In the golden haze of 1970s California, the American dream was alive in the cul-de-sacs of Sacramento, in the hum of lawnmowers and the scent of fresh-cut grass. Families played in front yards, doors remained unlocked, and trust was as common as sunshine. But beneath the surface of suburban serenity, a nightmare was quietly brewing, a nightmare that would go on to haunt the state for decades. It began in the summer of 1976. A series of burglaries had already shaken neighborhoods across the region, but these were different. The intruder wasn't just stealing, he was studying his victims, leaving signs that he'd been inside their homes, rearranging items, making them question their sanity. Then, the break-ins escalated into something much darker. The first reported rape occurred in June. A masked man slipped into a home under cover of darkness, tied up the male partner, and attacked the woman. He wore a ski mask. He whispered to himself during the assaults. He often spent hours in the home, lingering, eating food from the fridge, terrifying his victims with his patience. He was dubbed the East Area Rapist, and his attacks followed a horrifying pattern. He would stalk his victims for days, sometimes weeks. He memorized routines, observed the layout of their homes, and used knowledge of their lives against them. Sometimes he called them before or after the attack, his breathing heavy, his voice distant and distorted. The phone would ring late at night. Sometimes he would say nothing. Other times, he would whisper, "I'm going to kill you." The community was gripped with fear. Hardware stores couldn't keep locks on the shelves. People began sleeping with loaded guns, dogs became household staples, and for the first time, many Californians felt like their homes were no longer sanctuaries. And yet, despite the panic, the predator remained one step ahead. Detectives were baffled. His footprints were found in backyards. Stolen items were later discovered abandoned miles away. Bloodhounds would pick up his scent and then lose it suddenly, as if he had vanished into thin air. He used backyards like highways, slipping through fences, evading patrol cars, avoiding detection with the cunning of a ghost. He was more than a rapist. He was a planner, a predator. And soon, he would become a killer. The day after the discovery, Hollow Creek was not the same. It wasn't just the yellow tape cordoning off the Reynolds' modest home on Sycamore Lane, or the line of police vehicles parked like silent sentinels along the curb. It wasn't just the gawkers and news vans that now buzzed around like flies to rotting fruit. No, what changed was harder to name. Harder to see. It was the silence. A town like Hollow Creek, small, tight-knit, nestled between long-forgotten farmland and pine woods, was not built for violence. The loudest sounds on a regular day came from the clang of old railroad crossings, the hum of tractors in the distance, or the Sunday morning bell of St. Luke's Church. Now, even the birds seemed to quiet themselves. At the local diner, the Pine Cone, no one touched their coffee. The mugs sat steaming, untouched, as whispers replaced conversation. Sheriff Caleb Morris, a man as rooted to the town as the oak tree by the courthouse, sat at the end booth, rubbing his temples. The bags under his eyes weren't from lack of sleep alone. They were from something deeper, something more ancestral. A primal sense that something sacred had been broken. Across the room, Alice Garner, the high school librarian, clutched her cardigan tight, muttering to no one in particular, "I knew it. I always said something was off about that house." But even she didn't believe her own words. Because the truth was, no one had seen it coming. The Reynolds family was, by all accounts, ordinary. Steve Reynolds was a mechanic, steady hands, quiet voice, a man who always wiped the grease from his palms before shaking yours. His wife, Linda, volunteered with the PTA. Their daughter, little Ellie, played flute in the middle school band. The family dog, Marlowe, had won second place at the county fair's pet contest last year. There was no darkness, no warnings, no shadows stretching out from their porch. Until there was. The town only knew what had leaked. That all three had been found dead. That it hadn't been quick. And that someone had taken their time. People were afraid to ask the details. Afraid to hear answers they couldn't unhear. By evening, a makeshift memorial had begun to grow on the curb outside the Reynolds home. Candles in glass jars. Stuffed animals. Crayons. Handwritten notes in shaky cursive. The sight of it broke something in people. It made it real. Among the mourners stood an older man in a flannel jacket, Henry Griggs. He had been Steve's boss at the garage. "I remember the last thing Steve said to me," he muttered to Deputy Carla Reyes. His voice was gravel. "He said he might take Ellie camping that weekend. Just the two of them. Said she'd been having nightmares, and he thought the woods might do her good. Fresh air. No screens." Carla nodded, notepad closed, pen still. Sometimes, the silence was more telling than anything you could write down. Back at the station, the investigation was taking shape like a slow-developing photograph. The crime scene had revealed little in the way of fingerprints. The killer, or killers, had worn gloves. But it was what was left behind that haunted the forensics team: the methodical placement of the bodies, the symbols scrawled in charcoal above each bed, the faint scent of some kind of oil, something musky, earthy, wrong. The Reynolds dog, Marlowe, had not been found. Sheriff Morris stood before the evidence board, which now bore a mess of lines and photos that felt more like a web than a path. He stared at one picture longer than the rest, a close-up of a child's drawing found tucked beneath Ellie's bed. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands. A sun in the sky. A dog with a wagging tail. And off to the side, drawn in red crayon, was another figure. Tall, thin, black scribbles for eyes. Underneath it, in childish handwriting, "The man in the hallway." Morris exhaled slowly. Something didn't fit. Something was bending the rules. The murders were personal, yet clinical. Ritualistic, yet sloppy. There was no forced entry. No valuables taken. And still, something about the scene felt practiced. Rehearsed. That night, Hollow Creek didn't sleep. Children were kept home from school. Locks were checked and rechecked. Guns were loaded by people who hadn't fired a weapon in years. And behind closed doors, parents whispered promises they weren't sure they could keep. "You're safe. Nothing like that will happen here again." But they all felt it. Something was still out there. 2 days had passed since the Reynolds house became a shrine to grief. Hollow Creek hadn't breathed since. Sheriff Morris was back at the station before dawn, though he hadn't really left. He'd napped on the threadbare couch in his office, a fleece blanket over his legs and his hat pulled low. Outside his window, the sky bruised to a pale gray. The quiet tick of the wall clock was broken by a knock. Deputy Carla Reyes entered, holding a folder. Her face was drawn, her eyes rimmed red. She'd done 4 back-to-back shifts, and still, she refused to go home. "You're gonna kill yourself like this," Morris grunted, sitting up. Reyes didn't smile. "This came in from forensics. I think you'll want to see it." She handed him the folder. Inside were close-ups of the symbols found at the crime scene, each one painted above a victim's bed in what they'd initially thought was charcoal. "It's not charcoal," she said, voice low. "It's some kind of ash and animal fat. Primitive stuff. Burned bone. Mixed by hand." Morris stared at the photos. The symbols were crude, jagged. But now, someone had finally matched them to something. "A symbol from the Apatemnophiliac Codex," she continued. "Obscure stuff. Most of it lost or banned. Cultist nonsense, but there's a pattern." "What's it mean?" She hesitated. "Loosely. It's meant to summon clarity. A rite of purification. But what it really suggests is, someone thinks they're cleansing something. Sacrificing to bring order." "Order?" Morris echoed, disgust rising in his throat. "Religious, maybe. Or delusional." Morris closed the folder. "Either way," she added, "this wasn't just murder. This was performance." Later that morning, Carla drove out to the edge of Hollow Creek to follow up on a tip. The lead was weak. Someone had reported strange noises coming from an abandoned ranger station out in the pine forest. Normally, they'd ignore it. But now, nothing was normal. She parked her cruiser and hiked half a mile through undergrowth, boots crunching against frostbitten soil. The trees here were dense, old-growth pines that blocked out most of the sky. The air felt stiller. The ranger station appeared like a ghost through the branches. Weathered. Slumped. Half swallowed by vines. She circled the building slowly, hand on her holster. Then she found the door ajar. Her flashlight cut into the gloom. Inside, there were signs of recent entry. Food wrappers, a half-burned candle, a broken walkie-talkie. But what caught her attention most was the floor. A circle, scratched into the wood, surrounded by more of the same symbols from the Reynolds home. At the center was a matted pile of fur. Dog fur. Her stomach twisted. She stepped closer. There was something beneath it, a child's shoe. She knelt, pulled it free, turned it over. A name was written on the inner sole in blue marker. Ellie Reynolds. Carla stood frozen. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a shrine. And someone had come here more than once. But there was more. Above the fireplace, drawn in what looked like soot and blood, was a phrase scrawled in jagged, uppercase letters. "He walks clean because he knows." She snapped a photo and radioed in the location. "Sheriff," she said, her voice tight, "you're going to want to bring everyone." Back at the station, Sheriff Morris sat alone with his coffee, staring at the message on the whiteboard. "He walks clean because he knows." They'd run the phrase through every database. Nothing. No books, no online cult activity, no gang affiliation. Not even the FBI behavioral unit had a match. "I don't think it's meant for anyone but him," Carla said quietly. "It's not a warning. It's a signature." They were starting to understand. The killer wasn't hiding. He was presenting. Displaying. Each act was part of something larger, a ritual, a process. And worse, he was escalating. That night, a storm rolled in over Hollow Creek. Thunder cracked like bone. Rain slammed the pavement in sheets. Most people hunkered down in fear. But at 2:17 a.m., a 911 call shattered the fragile calm. A woman's voice, breathless, panicked. "He was standing in my backyard. Just watching. Not moving. I think it was him. He had something in his hand. Something long." Sheriff Morris arrived first. The woman, a widow named Edna Mayfield, lived just 2 blocks from the Reynolds place. Her backyard bordered a stretch of woods. "There," she whispered, pointing. Morris turned his flashlight toward the trees. Rain pounded the leaves. Shadows twisted. Nothing moved. But on the wet grass, half buried in the mud, he found a single item, an antique surgical bone saw. Polished. Sharp. Wrapped in twine. And taped to the handle was a Polaroid. It showed the Reynolds dog, Marlowe, still alive. Collar intact. Eyes wide. Tied to a tree. Behind it, blurred but unmistakable, was the outline of a man. Wearing a mask made of bark. The photo was real. The saw real. The rain, though heavy, hadn't erased the tracks in the mud. Sheriff Morris and Deputy Reyes followed them with flashlights and rifles, their boots sinking into soaked earth as they advanced into the trees behind Edna Mayfield's house. The forest swallowed them whole. The world shrank to breath, boots, rain, and silence. 20 feet into the woods, the track split, one set deeper, deliberate. Heavy. The other, lighter. Could have been animal. Or child. Then Morris stopped cold. At the base of a pine tree, barely visible in the stormlight, hung a leather cord. And dangling from it, a child's locket. Pink. Butterfly-shaped. Open. Inside was a photo of Ellie Reynolds and her dog, Marlowe. Both smiling. Pinned to the bark below it, with a single nail, was a strip of torn newspaper. Reyes pulled it free and held it under her flashlight. The headline read, "Wood Chapel Killer Released After 32 Years in Institution." Morris took the paper from her hand. The ink had started to run in the rain, but the face was still visible. An older man. Sunken cheeks. Eyes that looked inward, not out. "Name's Orson Greaves," Reyes said. "Convicted in 1989. Murders were ritualistic. Mutilation, candles, Latin phrases carved into walls. Same symbol set." Morris didn't move. Why wasn't this connected before? His prints didn't match. DNA wasn't in the system. And now he's free. He was released on medical grounds 6 months ago. Supposedly suffering from dementia. Placed in a state care facility outside Lexington. Did he ever live here? No record. Morris exhaled. Slow. Cold air misted from his lungs. Then someone's using his story. Or he never stopped, Reyes said, her voice low. By morning, the media had caught the scent. News vans formed a loose blockade near the sheriff's office, their lights like scavenger eyes. Cameras angled. Reporters barked into microphones, clawing for details no one wanted to give. But Morris didn't care about them. His eyes were fixed on the evidence wall. The locket. The symbols. The phrase. He walks clean because he knows. There was more to that sentence. He felt it. The way a song feels unfinished. He remembered something from a chapel sermon long ago, a phrase that had stuck with him, the pure walk untouched because they are known by God. He turned to Reyes. Get me everything on Wood Chapel. Not just the murders. The land. The people. Local legends. I want to know who Orson Greaves was before he became a monster. That evening, the town of Hollow Creek seemed to hold its breath. The streets emptied early. Curtains closed at sunset. Doors locked twice. But in one house, a modest weathered home on Elm Street, a boy named Toby Wexler sat awake in his room, reading by flashlight. He couldn't sleep. Not since Ellie Reynolds disappeared. She was in his class. Drew unicorns on her folders. Never said a mean thing to anyone. He heard something at his window. A tap. Then another. He turned the flashlight toward the curtains. A face was staring in. A mask of bark. Hollow eyes. Still. Watching. Toby screamed. His parents came running, but the figure was already gone. In the backyard, all they found were two things. A deep footprint in the flower bed. And a music box. Toby recognized it. It played Twinkle Twinkle. Ellie's favorite. She brought it to show and tell. Inside the box, where the twirling ballerina should have been, was something else. A human tooth. At 4 a.m., Reyes burst into Morris's office with a manila envelope. "Sheriff," she said, breathless, "I found something." The file was old. Nearly disintegrating. A photo, yellowed and torn, was paper-clipped to the top. It showed a small farmhouse surrounded by trees. Burned to its foundation. Greaves didn't just murder in Wood Chapel. He was born there. The house burned down in 1957. Arson. Cause never found. Survivors. 1. Orson. Age 7. Everyone else died. Parents. Sister. There were rumors it was a cult house. Locals said the family talked to things in the trees. The fire was called a cleansing. Morris swallowed. And the symbols? Identical. Found carved in the basement walls before they collapsed. Every single one. She handed him a sheet of copied text. It was a scan of a journal entry, attributed to Orson's mother. The spirits feed on what is broken. They offer knowledge for pain. If you give them something pure, they show you the truth. Below it, in different handwriting, was scrawled, "He walks clean because he knows. He knows because he watched. He watched because he could not stop them." And just like that, the picture changed. It wasn't random. It was inheritance. Or imitation. And the killer, whether Orson himself or someone obsessed with him, wasn't just recreating old murders. He was finishing something left undone. Rain didn't fall that morning. It poured. Sheriff Morris drove alone. He didn't tell Reyes where he was going. Didn't tell anyone. Some roads you took alone, and this one felt like it had been waiting for him since before he ever pinned on a badge. The GPS couldn't find the place. It hadn't existed digitally for decades. But he followed the hand-drawn map from the archive files, a wrinkled note with coordinates, written in shaky, looping script. The only directions left to Orson Greaves' birthplace. The ruin of the Greaves farmhouse. 30 miles outside Hollow Creek, beyond any cell reception, the forest grew older, wilder. Oaks and pines bent over the road like they were trying to whisper to one another. The silence was thick, not empty. It felt like a room full of people all holding their breath. He parked half a mile from a fire-blackened hill and hiked the rest on foot. The rain soaked him fast, even under his coat. Leaves dripped on his neck. Mud sucked at his boots. But then he saw it, just over the ridge. Charred stone, blackened wood beams, and a cellar door half-rotted, half-buried under vines. The farmhouse was still there, what little remained of it. Silent. Forgotten. Until now. Morris stepped inside the hollow skeleton of the foundation. Every footstep sounded louder than it should, and in the middle of the ruin, where the fireplace once stood, was something out of place. A circle of fresh stones, like a ritual ring. And in the center, a skull. Small, child-sized, carefully placed. A candle melted atop it, its wax running down into the eye socket like tears. He drew his weapon instinctively, even though the place felt emptied of life. But the wrongness was undeniable. This wasn't just a murder site. This was an altar. Scratched into the wall of the old fireplace, barely legible beneath soot and moss, were the same words again. He walks clean because he knows. But now, a new line had been added below, carved fresh. And now you know too. Back at the station, Reyes was already waiting when Morris returned. She didn't speak right away, just handed him an evidence bag. Inside was a cassette tape. Old. Faded label. No case. Found in a package delivered anonymously to the front desk just an hour ago. Morris stared at it, heart sinking. Scrawled in red marker across the tape were 3 words. From Orson's room. They played it on the department's last working tape deck. Static. Then breathing. Then a child's voice. Small. Unsteady. Male. It's in the basement again. I told Daddy, but he says it's just dreams. But I hear it. The knocking. Sometimes it talks. Not with words. Just pictures in my head. And I see things. Bad things. Mommy said it's the Watchers. That they lived here before us. That the woods remember. That they picked me. I don't want to watch anymore. Click. Then silence. Then, faintly, a voice, not the child's. Not fully human. You see now. You see what he saw. The flame remembers. The soil accepts. Then a sound like teeth chattering. Or maybe laughter. And then the tape cut out. What the hell is this? Morris muttered. Reyes's face was pale. That voice, it wasn't dubbed. I ran an analysis. It's real. And it doesn't match any known vocal pattern. Not man, woman, or child. And the boy. It's Orson. Same vocal markers from old interviews when he was institutionalized. But that recording predates his arrest by years. So who sent it? I ran the postmark. She handed him a printout. It was mailed from a town 20 miles from here. Guess what it's called? He looked. His blood ran cold. New Wood Chapel. That night, back at his house, Morris sat in the dark. The rain had stopped, but the silence had deepened. He was tired, but sleep wouldn't come. So he opened the file again. Photo of Ellie. The locket. The carved phrase. He stared at the words. He walks clean because he knows. He said it aloud. And in that moment, he understood. It wasn't about the killer walking clean, because he knew how to avoid detection. It was something far older. The killer believed knowledge itself made him pure. That sacrifice, of innocence, of purity, of children, was an offering to something bigger. And each time, the killer didn't just leave clues. He left messages for the next one. Because it wasn't just a killer. It was a lineage. A coven. A passing of the blade. And now, Morris had seen the place, touched the altar, and heard the voice. Now he knew. They didn't sleep that night. Neither Morris nor Reyes. The recording had changed everything. It wasn't just about Orson anymore. It was about what came before him. Something older than any file in the archive. And whatever it was watching them now. Reyes pulled up satellite maps, records, court logs, anything from New Wood Chapel. It was barely a town. Population, 47. 1 general store. 1 church. And a string of unexplained child disappearances from the 1960s that were written off as wild animal attacks. Except now, through the lens of their case, they looked a hell of a lot more like early rituals. The kind Orson had mentioned on that tape. And then they found something stranger. A missing sheriff's report. Dated 1973. Filed by the then sheriff of Hollow Creek, a man named Walter Lang. The report had never been digitized. Just yellowing paper tucked into a box in the back of a storage cabinet Reyes hadn't looked through before. It read, "Saw them again tonight. 3 of them. Standing in the cornfields. Watching the house. Faces painted like deer skulls. The child's body was never found, but I know what they did. We all know. This town used to burn witches, now it breeds them. I'm resigning. I'll be gone by morning. I only pray the one who watches doesn't come to my family. He always takes those who see too much." Attached to the report was a photograph, crumpled and blackened at the edges like someone tried to burn it. 3 figures. Blurry. Standing just beyond the edge of a field. And between them, almost transparent, something like a shadow with antlers. That night, Sheriff Morris got a call from dispatch. No words. Just, "You should come to the station. You need to see this for yourself." He didn't ask questions. When he arrived, Reyes was pale, shaking, pointing at the monitors from the jail holding cell. Inside the cell, which had been empty hours ago, now stood a man. Or something like a man. Tall, thin, wearing a coat far too old for this era. Long gray beard. Bare feet. He didn't speak. Didn't move. There had been no arrest. No record of entry. And yet, he was there. "Who is he?" Morris asked. "We checked every camera," Reyes whispered. "He wasn't there 10 minutes ago." Then he was. The man finally looked up, right at the camera. Eyes milky white. Mouth opened, slowly. And though no microphone should have picked up anything from that room, every speaker in the building came alive at once. "He walks clean because he knows." Then, without warning, the man collapsed. They rushed in, but he was gone. Not unconscious. Gone. As if the body had vanished into smoke. Only one thing remained in the center of the cell. A photo. Fresh. Undamaged. It was a Polaroid, time-stamped 20 minutes into the future. And it showed Reyes and Morris standing in front of the new Wood Chapel Church. Blood on the steps. Something behind them in the photo. Something moving. They drove out before dawn. No plan. Just weapons, flashlights, and a silent agreement. They had to find that church. And whatever was waiting inside. The drive to New Wood Chapel was long, cutting through gray winter fields and bare trees like skeletons reaching toward a sunless sky. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. No birds. No wind. Just the crunch of tires over gravel and the occasional cough from the car heater. Detective Mara Ellison sat silently in the passenger seat, her fingers drumming a slow, nervous rhythm on the door. Beside her, Detective Cal Rhodes clutched the wheel like it might break loose. Both had read the transcript of Orson's confession, if that's what it was. He spoke in fragments, but the key phrase that echoed like a hammer to the skull was clear. They worshipped something in the pines. Not God. Never God. It wore their faces. Orson had said it in a voice not entirely his own. New Wood Chapel, according to what little they'd found in public records, was a settlement-turned-church camp located just outside of town. Officially, it had closed down in 1994 after a fire destroyed part of the chapel building. But local whispers said the church was used long after that, for meetings, for watching the woods, and for things no one wrote down. As they reached the clearing, the pine trees thickened, forming walls on either side of the single dirt road. Then, as if the forest decided to make room for them, it opened, revealing the crumbling remains of a chapel. It was smaller than expected, more of a longhouse than a church. The roof sagged in the middle, the stained glass was smashed, and the iron bell in the tower had long since rusted into silence. Mara stepped out first. The air changed the moment her boots hit the frozen soil. She turned slowly, eyes scanning the treeline. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "Yeah," Cal said. "Feels like we're being watched." They approached the building, pushing open the heavy wooden doors. The hinges groaned like a dying animal. Inside, rot hung in the air like a veil. Pews had been pushed to the sides, and the altar had been replaced with a stone circle, dark with age. Candle stubs surrounded it. But it wasn't the altar that stopped them both. It was what was carved into the wall behind it. A spiraling symbol, made of horns, branches, and human faces, a grotesque, precise design that pulsed with something that felt alive. "I've seen this," Mara murmured. "Where?" "On the boy's tape. In his drawings. On Orson's arm." They circled the room slowly. Scorch marks littered the floor. Claw marks scraped deep into the wood beneath the pulpit. Something terrible had happened here. In the back room, they found the church records, or what remained of them. Torn pages. Waterlogged hymnals. But one thing was clear. The church's final pastor, Reverend Ellis Monroe, had vanished in 1994, the night the chapel burned. No body was ever found. But someone had been here since then. In the back corner, there were fresh blankets, a burned-out lantern, and a set of Polaroid photos scattered across the floor. Cal knelt to pick them up. His breath caught. Each photo showed the same place, a clearing in the woods. And in each photo, someone stood in the center of the clearing, wearing a mask. A different one in each shot, some made of animal bone, some of painted bark, all with twisted smiles and hollow eyes. And in the last photo, the masked person was staring at the camera. And Cal's police badge number was scratched into the corner of the frame. The Polaroids felt warm in Cal's hand, though the air around them was frigid. He handed them to Mara silently, his lips tight, his eyes flicking to the tree-line outside. The forest, so still a moment ago, now hummed with pressure. "Someone knew we'd come," Mara whispered. "That badge number, that's not random." "No," Cal said. "It's mine." They backed out of the ruined church and stood once more under the pines, which now felt taller, darker, as if the forest had grown teeth. Neither detective said it aloud, but they both felt it, the same sensation you get when someone is standing directly behind you. Watching. Waiting. They decided to return in the morning, with backup, with search dogs, with more light. But Mara couldn't sleep. She stared at her motel ceiling until 3:11 a.m., when the call came. "We found something," the officer on the other end said. "Near where you were today. North Path. There's a structure." The officers had located it using a drone's infrared camera. It didn't show up on any maps. No address. No trail. No recent records. Just a shape in the woods, a perfect octagon, surrounded by symbols burned into the snow. Mara and Cal reached the site just after dawn. The structure was made of interlocking stone slabs, crude but tightly fitted, almost like a ritual bunker. No windows. One narrow, iron door. It looked ancient, but the lock was new, industrial, expensive, coded. "This wasn't built by teenagers in the 90s, Cal muttered. "No. Someone's still using it." A forensics tech examined the door, then stopped. "There's something inside. Heat signatures. Moving." He looked pale. "It's not animals." Mara and Cal nodded at each other, drew their weapons. Boom. The battering ram echoed through the forest like a shot in a cathedral. Inside was no light, until their flashlights sliced through the dark and landed on the walls. And the walls were covered, floor to ceiling, in masks. Hundreds of them. Animal skulls. Carved bark. Some appeared to be made of human skin. In the center of the floor lay a stone pit, filled with ashes. Beside it sat a wooden crate. Inside the crate, VHS tapes, numbered. Just like the one found with Orson. "It's them," Mara said. "The ones who filmed the killings. The ones who made Orson a puppet." She picked up a tape. The label read, "Session 13, Acceptance." And below that, "Reverend Monroe." Back at the precinct, a special team assembled to watch what they found. The tapes were ritualistic. Each began the same way. A masked figure entered the frame. A subject, a man, a woman, once a teenager, was brought in. Then, silence. A ritual. A recitation. A transformation. Then screaming. Tape 13 showed Reverend Ellis Monroe himself, bound, crying, forced to read from a black-covered book in a language no one could identify. At the end, he looked directly into the camera and said, "They take your voice. They wear your soul. They become you. They became me." Then, he screamed as someone behind him placed a mask over his face, a mask of his own face. The screen went black. They returned to Orson's holding cell. But he wasn't there. His bed was empty. No sign of forced exit. No footage from security cameras. Just the sound of something breathing. On the wall, scratched in blood. You were watching him. But something else was watching you. The moment they realized Orson was gone, the precinct froze. Every hallway echoed with rushing footsteps and frantic voices. The CCTV systems were scrubbed again and again, frame by frame, second by second. "This is impossible," one officer whispered. "It's like he vanished into thin air." But it wasn't impossible. It was planned. Because what no one noticed at first was the mirror in the corner of Orson's cell, standard issue, meant for observation. But under UV light, Mara found a symbol etched faintly into its surface. It was the same one they'd seen in the octagonal bunker. A circle within a triangle, bisected by an eye. She turned to Cal. "What if he didn't escape?" she said. "What if he was retrieved?" The investigation took a sharp turn into territory Mara had long avoided: symbolism, cults, pre-Christian mythology. With help from a linguistics professor named Dr. Hector Vale, they discovered the symbol was referenced in ancient texts found in the Nag Hammadi scrolls, then again in 17th-century grimoires. The cult, loosely translated, was called the Hollowing. Their belief was simple: identity is sin, ego is a cage. The only path to freedom was to become hollow, to surrender your name, your memories, your face. And that's when Mara understood the masks. "They weren't disguises," she said. "They were trophies. Vessels. Whoever wore them wasn't just pretending to be someone else. They became them." They began combing the region's missing persons cases, especially ones with strange details: empty clothes found in place of bodies, sightings of people days after they were declared dead, duplicate identities appearing on surveillance. A pattern emerged, always near the forest. Always during winter. Dr. Vale warned them that the cult's activities followed a lunar cycle. The next full moon was in 4 nights. "If they've taken Orson back," he said grimly, "they're preparing to erase him completely." An anonymous tip brought them to an abandoned dairy farm, about 30 miles from the bunker. It had burned down years ago. Locals swore it was haunted. People heard chanting, saw lights, even claimed to see themselves walking past the windows. Inside, they found a hatch beneath a feeding trough. It led to a cellar that stank of mold and blood. And there he was, Orson, sitting in the dark, cross-legged, dressed in white. When Mara called out, he looked up slowly, but his eyes were wrong. Too wide, too calm. And he spoke not like Orson, but like a choir of voices all at once. "You seek the shell, but the soul has gone. You wear your grief like a name. You are not yet ready to be free." Cal raised his weapon, but Orson, or what was wearing Orson, only smiled. "You were meant to find us. You've been watched since the orchard. She is waiting for you, Mara. You'll see her again." "Who?" "Your sister." Mara's breath stopped. She hadn't heard that name in 20 years. Mara had spent 2 decades burying that part of her life. The farmhouse, the orchard, the terrible silence after that summer storm. Her little sister, Ellie, had gone missing when they were children. It had been ruled a drowning, a tragic accident. But Mara had always known better. There was no water nearby. No current to sweep her away. Just rows of twisted apple trees, and the strange humming that filled the air that day. Now Orson, if it was still him, had spoken her name. He shouldn't have known it. No one in the department even knew she had a sister. And that smile. It was Ellie's smile. Back at the precinct, Mara couldn't focus. She dug through old boxes in her attic, dusty photographs, newspaper clippings, her father's journals. One page stood out. A drawing Ellie had made just days before she vanished. A tree with dozens of masks hanging from the branches. On the back, scrawled in crayon, "He wears them when he comes out of the ground." Mara's heart dropped. The orchard wasn't just a childhood memory. It was the beginning. Meanwhile, Cal had stayed behind at the burned-out farm to collect evidence. In a half-melted camcorder, he found a tape labeled Reaping, number 0037. It looked ancient, but someone had tried to preserve it. The footage was shaky, dim. A basement. Flickering candles. A circle of people in robes, chanting. In the middle, a child, maybe 8 or 9, curled in a chair, bound and blindfolded. The audio crackled. He must forget. He must become hollow. Then the sound of tearing cloth, and a scream that pierced through the static. One of the cultists leaned in close to the camera at the very end. Their mask was made of porcelain. But underneath, just for a flicker, it looked like Mara. With Dr. Vale's help, they triangulated several cult activities around abandoned orchards, specifically in cold, isolated areas tied to seasonal rituals. They discovered that Mara's childhood home had been built on land previously owned by a 19th-century religious sect known as the Order of the Harvest Sun. They believed the earth had mouths that opened once every lunar cycle, places where the hollowing could begin. The orchard was one of them, Dr. Vale whispered. Mara knew what she had to do. She had to go back. The old house had long since collapsed into rot. Only the stone chimney and remnants of the cellar remained. But the orchard, it was still there. The trees looked diseased now, twisted like bodies in torment, with bark that peeled like skin. Crows gathered silently overhead. No wind, no rustle. At the center of the orchard was something she never noticed as a child. A stone well. She approached it slowly, looked inside. Nothing but blackness. And then, a voice. Soft. Childlike. Mara, are you coming down this time? It was Ellie. Or something pretending to be her. Without hesitation, Mara clipped a flashlight to her belt, tied a rope around a tree, and began lowering herself into the well. The walls were damp and carved with more symbols, a language not written, but scratched in suffering. The air grew colder the deeper she went, until finally her boots landed on wet stone. She turned the light. A tunnel, lined with masks. Hundreds of them. And at the end, footsteps. Something was waiting. Mara moved through the tunnel slowly, the beam of her flashlight flicking across the walls like a heartbeat. Every mask she passed seemed to follow her. Some were crude, made from bark or bone, but others looked almost human. Too human. Each had a small hole carved into the forehead. Each seemed to breathe. Behind her, the rope she'd used to descend into the well twitched once. Then again. She didn't turn around. The tunnel curved, then opened into a cavern. Not natural, this was carved, shaped, sanctified. A stone altar stood at the center, surrounded by flickering lanterns that hadn't burned in years. And behind it, a mural. Painted in blood. It showed a tree growing upside down, its roots reaching toward the sky, its branches buried in the earth. Hanging from its limbs were dozens of people, faceless, skin stretched tight. And at the base, a girl in white. Ellie. Mara stepped closer, reaching toward the image, when something moved behind the altar. She froze. A figure stepped forward, dressed in black robes, its face hidden behind a mask that looked exactly like Mara's own. It didn't speak. It simply raised one hand and pointed behind her. She turned. More figures. 6, 8, 10. All in robes. All in masks of people she recognized. Her partner Cal, her mother, her younger self, her sister. And one empty mask. Held in outstretched hands. They wanted her to put it on. A voice rose, not from any one of them, but from the walls themselves. It sounded like Ellie. And like Mara's father. And like the scream from the tape. You don't wear the mask to hide. You wear it to remember what must be forgotten. The robed figure stepped closer. The mask trembled in its hands. Mara backed away. Her flashlight flickered, then died completely. Darkness swallowed the room. And in that perfect silence, something whispered directly into her ear. You already wore it once. Would you like to remember? Mara didn't scream. She couldn't. The voice in the darkness hadn't just spoken to her, it had reached into something beneath memory, into the parts of her mind she'd sealed shut since childhood. Her knees buckled, and the floor felt like it was swaying beneath her, like standing on a raft drifting slowly into a black ocean. She closed her eyes. And remembered. A summer day. Ellie laughing, barefoot in the orchard, running through rows of apple trees so ripe they bent from the weight of their own fruit. The hum in the air. The taste of copper on her tongue. She remembered the chanting. the robed figures, the circle drawn in salt and blood. And she remembered her own hands, smaller, trembling, but not resisting. Placing a mask over Ellie's face. And stepping back. Mara staggered to her feet, breath ragged. The darkness around her pulsed, and the circle of masked figures began to chant again, soft at first, then rising in rhythm like a second heartbeat. She couldn't tell what language it was. She didn't need to. The meaning was in the marrow. Shed the name, shed the face, become the vessel. She turned and ran. The tunnel behind her had changed, longer now, the walls narrowing, squeezing in with every step. Hands reached out from the darkness, brushing her skin, whispering promises of peace, of forgetting. She burst into the chamber beneath the well just as the first pale light of dawn touched the rim above. The rope was gone. Only the well stone throat remained, silent and wet. Mara looked up, her breath steaming in the cold. Above her, just for a second, a face peered over the edge. It was Ellie. Older. Smiling. Then she was gone. And Mara was alone. Again. But not empty. Because this time, she remembered. And now, someone else would come looking. The team at the precinct didn't know what to make of the signal. A low-frequency transmission had been detected near the orchard, short, pulsing, almost like Morse code, but older. It wasn't broadcasting on any conventional band. Cal was the first to recognize the pattern. "It's coordinates," he said. "And a date." The date was today. The location was the orchard. He didn't wait for backup. By the time Cal reached the ruins, the wind had stopped. The trees stood motionless, the crows gone, the light wrong, bruised purple, like a sky holding its breath. He found the well. There were footprints in the mud leading to it. Not out. He called Mara's name, once, twice. Nothing. Then he lowered a mic and camera on a line, feeding it down into the dark. Static. Nothing. Then, movement. The camera jolted. A figure. Small, childlike, standing at the bottom of the well. Ellie. She looked directly into the lens, then leaned forward and whispered something. The audio spiked, louder than it should have been, not just sound but vibration. It shook Cal to his knees. Later, when they reviewed the footage, the whisper would be translated. "She gave herself to the hollow so I could come back." The feed cut. At that exact moment, Mara opened her eyes. She was lying on cold stone. Her flashlight was dead. But she wasn't alone. Across from her sat a child. Filthy dress. Mask in her lap. Ellie. Real. Not a memory. They stared at each other in silence. Then Ellie spoke, voice hoarse and dry. "You left me once. Don't leave again." Mara reached out slowly, but stopped. Because something was behind Ellie. Not a figure, just a feeling. A presence. Tall. Watching. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It had always been there. It was wearing Mara's face. And smiling. Mara didn't scream. She didn't move. The thing in the shadows, wearing her face, tilted its head slowly, like a child studying its reflection. The expression was wrong. Lips too wide. Eyes too still. It blinked, but not in sync. Each eye moved independently, as if rehearsing how to be her. Behind her, Ellie whispered again. "You left me in the orchard. I waited. I waited until I forgot my name." Mara turned to her sister. "Ellie, I didn't leave you. I couldn't find you. We looked for days, weeks. I never stopped." "You didn't look here," Ellie said. "Where the orchard ends. Where they open the mouths." Suddenly, the masks on the tunnel walls began to rattle, softly at first, then louder, faster, as though hundreds of teeth were chattering in the dark. The air grew heavier. And the other Mara stepped forward. It mimicked her every movement, but reversed. A mirror without glass. And then it spoke. Not in words, but in memory. She felt the orchard again. The day Ellie disappeared. The humming in the sky. Her own voice calling. And then, nothing. Except this time, there was more. A figure in white, kneeling by the well. A hand offered to Ellie. Ellie taking it. Going down. And something ancient closing the door behind her. You forgot, the voice said, echoing inside her skull. You chose the surface. She chose the hollow. Mara dropped to her knees. I didn't choose anything, she whispered. You will, said the voice. Or you both remain. Behind her, Ellie stood up and placed the mask on her face. When she looked at Mara again, her eyes were black. You have to choose, Mara. Only one can go back. The tunnel began to shake. Stone dust filled the air. The well above trembled. And from deep below, something rose. Something vast. Something with no name. Mara took a breath. And stepped forward,